cross players here, I know, coach, health coach. So, hi to everybody out there. I know it's always nice to get out of school for half a day. It must have been fun. We're just trying to give you another, more information on the lake itself. Historically, it has a lot to do with the history of the Onondaga Nation, Haudenosaunee, which we call ourselves. We call people of the Longhouse. The English call us the Six Nations, the French call us the Iroquois. So we use those names intermittently, and of course you know a lot of the nation students here going to school here in the nation, and then on to Lafayette here. I graduated here from Lafayette. Don't ask me when, that's quite a bit back. And I played lacrosse up here. Knew a lot of probably your grandparents and parents maybe. So the lake itself is really an important part of our history, of the people of this nation, of this area. The Haudenosaunee consists of the five original nations, the Mohawks starting in the east, Onondagas here in the center, and we are the capital of the five nations. We also, there's also the Cayugas and the Senecas. And in the early 1700s, the Tuscaroras migrated up here, and we took them in to be known as the Six Nations. So the history of the lake itself is it goes way back when we got the message from what we call the peacemaker, and he came to our communities with a message that he had gotten because of what was happening in this area. We say 1,000 years ago. There's different dates on the origin of the Haudenosaunee or the Confederacy, but he came to us. He came and we got this message because our people were fighting each other and doing a lot of war and killing each other, and we were also there was a lot of cannibalism. So the message there was that he created an intent for us to be treating each other this way. So he gave us a message, and he gave it to this certain man who we call the peacemaker. And he came to our territories and talked about this great law of peace, which meant peace, power, and righteousness. But there's a very long story about how he come into the world and how he had finally come in and met the nations there. And one of the first nations he met was the Mohawks, where there was a lot of killing in that area, and people weren't safe. So he had convinced the leaders there to accept his message, and then he went along with the five nations and convinced them. But here at Onondaga, there was one powerful leader, and his name was Tadodaho at the time. So as he brought this message in of bringing the five nations together, he kind of come here and he went on because the Tadodaho was not ready to accept that, was not convinced to accept this message of peace. Tadodaho was a very evil person and had a lot of power, and had a lot of power in the area, so a lot of people were afraid of him. So the peacemaker come into the territory with the Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondaga here, Cayuga, and the Seneca. And then, as he had convinced the four other nations to accept this peace, he said, it will not succeed unless the Tadodaho accepts the peace also. So they had grouped together and come and approached Tadodaho, and all this happened after everybody had come together. Not everybody, but a few of the leaders had accepted that peace, but had to approach the Tadodaho. And the village was on the northeast side of the lake, so they had to cross the lake in order to get to the tadodaho to convince him to accept the message. So, they attempted a couple times, and they say he brought up the winds, and the winds pushed the people back, and they regrouped, and they come again with some songs that tried to convince the tadodaho. The city was so evil that you talk about having snakes in his hair, meaning that he had this evil mind that was so bad that he was like had snakes in his hair, and he was all crooked, and very scary person, very powerful person. So as they approached him, and he knew this message was coming, and as they approached him, he started to straighten out, and they were singing the songs and coming across the lake, and he started to listen to what they were saying. But in order for him to accept this, they kind of had to barter with him and said, well, if you accept this message of peace, then we'll make Onondaga here the capital of the 5 nations, where everybody will gather, and you will be in charge of bringing those leaders together. So then this is how he accepted this message of peace. So they had to barter with him so he would still have some of his power and lead all the nations. So this all happened on the lake, and so that's the big significance of Onondaga Lake being sacred to us, because it's so much part of our history. So what we call, when the peacemakers set up the chiefs, and the 50 chiefs, and the 5 nations, those titles, right from then, all those 50 titles will continue down through the nations. Where the Mohawks have 9 titles, the Oneidas have 9 titles, the Onondagas have 14 titles, the Cayugas have 10 titles, and the Senecas have 8 titles. So all these names are still passed down to the leaders, to the 5 nations. So we've still, the traditional councils are still going on in their traditional ways. And back then, it was part of that message was that the clan mothers would pick the leaders. So every chief of that clan had a clan mother, and all the people, all his relatives were of that clan. So, but it was up to the women to choose these leaders amongst the people, because the women took care of the children as they grew up. They knew what kind of a person this man would be to lead their people and make decisions for them. So now we still do this today. Anytime we lose a leader, there's a great gathering, and it's to replace him with another leader, and he has to go through all this acceptance process. First with his clan, his people, with his nation, and then with the whole confederacy. So it's all based on equality and balance. When we gather for Grand Council, we have 3 sides. We have what we call the fire. Over here we call the well, and over here we call the other side of fire. So it is said that the U.S. government is based on that system, equality. Or in the U.S. government, you have what we call the executive, and then the Senate, and then the House over here. So it's the same thing. In our council, we'll have the Onondagas sit in the middle here, and the Senecas and Mohawks are what we call the well, and they're called the elder brothers along with us. And then the younger brothers, which are the Cayugas, Oneidas, and later the Tuscaroras joined them. So anytime there's a decision to make, it's brought up here in the well, and the 2 sides will go back and forth to come up to an agreement as to to a consensus of whatever the problem is. And when they come to an agreement, they send it back to us at Onondaga, and we pretty much, if we need to add something or to more or less just to sanction what's been agreed upon. So that's the basic process that we go in, and the same balance is there in the nations when the nations meet, and we're split up similarly in our councils where we have these three bodies, and it's all with balance. So we're still going on this way. We have traditional councils in and around with the Senecas, the Cayugas, and still conducting our way, still having those titles. So right from here at Onondaga Lake is where that was pretty much started. It started there, and when the tadodaho accepted that police, that made the process to start, and then we were given all our laws and how to conduct our ceremonies and how we lead the people. One of the first things we were told as leaders is to say, don't think of yourself, don't think of your family or your grandchildren, your children or your grandchildren, but think of the 7 generations ahead, and how your decision will affect those coming up. So those right there gives you a perspective of how far we're thinking when we make a decision. It's not just for us today, how is that going to affect those future generations? So, and that's how we need to ensure that the children that we have today will still be there for the next generation. So that's a little bit about our history. I know you went out there to see the lake. We were of this community here. Onondaga was this. We lived in this section. We were broken up mainly by our languages. We are slightly different from the Mohawk to the Seneca, but all our basic languages, our roots are the same, and each nation has a little bit different, but we can understand one another through that basic root system. So we've come here, and people have been moved from the area. We had a lot of wars back then, and so we had a land rights case that we filed in 2000, early 2000, and it's gone through the process, and so now it's gone through up to the Supreme Court, and they've rejected doing it. So it's pretty much gone through the U.S. laws and avenues that we have in the U.S. courts, and now we'll go on into the international. But in that law, in the land rights action that we had, we took five companies in the area that had also done a lot of pollution. We sued New York State, counties, and the cities, and five companies. And one of those companies was Honeywell, but at the time it was I think it was Allied Chemical, and before that it was Solvent Process. Because of what they had, basically, they were the majority factor of the condition of the lake now. And so now what you went out and seen was the cleanup of that lake. And so and how that so the pollution of the lake has been in progress over 100 years of just basically using the lake as a dumping area, getting rid of waste and whatever these manufacturers had, to just kind of dump it into the lake. almost have 100 years of that, which have started to dredge now and clean up. The state and Honeywell come to an agreement, which we weren't part of, and they had like 5 options, and most of it was according to how much it would cost. And it went from, I think, 2.3 billion down to around 500 million for the cleanup. And the state and Honeywell come to an agreement of doing the lower 400 some, almost 500 million cleanup. So that's where they are now. So we always thought that it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough being taken out of there. As you know from the statistics, and Sarah will go into a little bit more about what they're taking out and what they're not taking out. But we were kind of we were trying, just given this is what we're going to do, and which was dredge the lake and put this cap over it to seal all the mostly with the mercury that's on the bottom of the lake, which is very bad for any of the fish and the waterfowl and all the animals in the area. And even the use of the lake, you can't fish there. You can't eat you can fish there, but you can't eat the fish. It's not advised to eat pregnant women or children. Are not advised to eat more than, I forget what it is. Not advised to eat any of those fish out of that lake because of the contamination that's in their ecosystem. So we've kind of just kind of accept that at least they're cleaning some of it up, and after they're done, there isn't much that we'll just see what happens with the lake, how much it cleans up, and this cap we're kind of worried about because we don't know if it's going to maintain itself and like keep that covered, our mercury underneath there and covered, and all the other contaminants. So that's basically where we are now. It's kind of just watching, see what's going on. I know they're having a lot of problems with the. I mean, there's no place to put this stuff. You know, nobody wants it in their yards. It's being sent up into Camillus. There's problems with that. There's a lot of waste beds around the lake. And, of course, there's leaching through just the sediment and all the stuff leaching through and coming back into the lake. So there's still a lot of problems with cleaning up the lake. But we see there's at least there's some, they're trying to do something. Whether this succeeds or not, we'll just have to find out. But so at this time, I'd just like to turn it to Sarah. She can give you more of the stats on what they're doing and the percentages and all this. But thank you.
with the nation on various community education initiatives relating to Onondaga Lake and its watershed. When I say watershed, what does that mean? Let's talk about that. Sure. Sure.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
It means the lake and all the rivers that go into it and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's all the land that drains into Onondaga Lake, right? So the story of the water in Onondaga Lake isn't just the story of what's in the lake. It's the story of all of the water that has come from the land surrounding Onondaga Lake, about 285 square miles, that comes through. So everything that happens to that water on the way to the lake impacts the lake. And it doesn't just stop at the lake, right? Where does the water go after it leaves the lake? the water leaves the lake, where does it go? Some goes into the area. Most of it goes into the Seneca River, and it keeps going. It goes to Oneida Lake, and then it goes out to the ocean. So there is a direct, natural waterway connection between where we are sitting right now and the ocean. That's a really cool thing. It made a big difference back before around 1800 because there were fish that would travel between the ocean and Onondaga Lake and Onondaga Creek and back again. The salmon and the eel made these incredible journeys between the ocean and this place where we are now. To talk about the lake cleanup. So, I understand that you guys went and you heard from Honeywell this morning. I want to present some thoughts and some critiques and some questions for you all to consider, because I think that as people who live in the Onondaga Lake watershed, whose future is dependent upon this land that we live on, we have a responsibility to ask the tough questions. And the thing that you have to remember is that the most important information that you can find about anything that's going on is never up front. It's never up front. You have to ask the tough questions. And sometimes you don't find an answer right away. But it takes a community that has courage to face problems that we don't know how to solve and not look away. And that's what we need to do together, because we're all in this together. It impacts all of us. And we all have an impact on the water as well. So we have referred to some statistics, right? Honeywell makes a big deal about the fact that they're taking all of this stuff out of the lake, right? They're taking 6% of the pollution out of the lake. Most of it is going to Camillus in people's backyards. The issue with Camillus, now everybody's saying, well, they've controlled the air quality problem. It's not a big deal. We don't know what's going to happen in the long term. That pollution will stay there, right? The thing about what's going on with the cleanup is that they are leaving the vast majority of the pollution in place, right? They're dredging 6% of the lake bottom. Excuse me, I said it incorrectly. They're not taking 6% out. They're taking just over 1/10 of the pollution in the lake bottom out of the lake. They're dredging 6% of the surface of the lake bottom. They're capping 14% of the surface of the lake bottom. It's not a lot, right? It's not a lot. And most of that pollution is staying in place. There are waste beds all around Onondaga Lake. Those are staying in place. So they have to come up with these systems to monitor that pollution, right? Because you're supposed to protect public health. That's the point of Superfund cleanups, is you're supposed to protect human and other animal life from exposure to this pollution. So they have to keep monitoring that forever, right? Because it's not going away. So we have to monitor that pollution forever. We have to live with the risk that there might be something that happens. So Honeywell and the state chose the least expensive option for cleaning up the lake, and they're asking the watershed community to live with the risk forever, because it's going to stay there. When you think about that pollution that's getting in the lake, and the fact that we have to monitor and we have to repair the systems that have to keep working forever to make sure that pollution doesn't hurt us. For example, the barrier wall. I don't know if you guys talked about the barrier wall this morning. There's about 100,000 gallons of polluted water that's getting backed up behind that barrier wall every day that they have to treat at a water treatment plant, and then eventually send it to Metro for more treatment, and then send it into the lake. So they have to keep that operating, right? When the cap wears down over time, they have to repair the cap. So there's costs that keep going into the future as a result of leaving the pollution there. We have to think about that. We also have to think about the fact that, what did we just see happen in Camillus, right? A whole bunch of people got really sick from a tiny amount of pollution that got into the air. So tiny that all of the government regulators said, it's not enough to hurt you. It's not enough to hurt your health. But people were still getting sick. The numbers that they calculate to say, okay, this is the amount of pollution that hurts your health. That's an average, right? People still get hurt. The people in Camillus weren't making that up. They were getting hurt because that tiny, tiny bit of pollution, which is now sitting in en masse in their backyards, got into the air. So yeah, they're taking care of it now, but we have to remember that there's that potential for leakage, right? There's that potential. We have to keep monitoring and taking care of things. So I think those are some of the big questions that I want to raise about the lake. I know you guys also talked about nitrate addition. I heard you talking, you went and learned about the solution to deal with mercury, right? So something that Honeywell doesn't tell you is that some of the highest concentrations of mercury sitting in the bottom of the lake are in the deep waters of the lake, where they decided that it wasn't cost efficient to put any caps down. So that's why they're working on putting the nitrates in the bottom of the lake, because they're trying to keep that mercury from getting into the water, into the food chain, and ultimately into the bodies of people who want to eat that fish, right? And organisms that eat those fish. So there's an issue here, right? Because there's two solutions that they currently have in their heads for how to deal with this mercury that they're not going to take out of the lake. One is to put these nitrates down, right? And to keep applying them, keep putting them in there until eventually, they're hoping, the sediments that naturally flow into the lake through the tributaries will cover up that pollution to the point where it's not a danger anymore because it won't get into the water column. It won't be exposed, it will be covered up naturally. So there's two issues with that, right? One, well there's actually many, but one is that they're relying on the sediment from the mud boils. Have you guys talked about the mud boils? Mm-hmm. I think you're gonna, so I don't totally want to spoil the surprise. But so the mud boils are a problem that exist in Onondaga Creek in the Tully Valley, which the nation believes is very strongly connected to salt mining that was done by the predecessors of Honeywell in the valley, right? The mud boils are now sitting in the middle of Onondaga Creek, and they have devastated the creek environment, just really devastated that environment. And so the regulators and Honeywell are depending on that problem to help be part of the solution in covering up that pollution. So there's two injustices there, isn't there? We're leaving the pollution in the lake, which is an incredibly special place, and we're depending on another source of pollution to deal with it. Oh, and then there's a third thing. We're adding nitrates, which is actually a type of pollution, into the lake to deal with the pollution that's sitting there. I think there are a lot of questions to be asked. I think there's a lot of excitement right now because they're looking at the mercury levels and they're like, well, hey, it's working. This is great. Actually, the levels of mercury have varied a lot over the years, and it's too soon to start blowing the trumpet. It really is. And we need to make sure we wait and see what happens. But we also need to ask, what is the impact of adding nitrates to the water? Does it impact the lake? Does it impact the lakes downstream, which already get nitrates and other sorts of nutrients from lots of different sources, and they're dealing with the problems that creates? Are there impacts? No one's asked that question. Nobody's talking about that. And how long do we have to add those nitrates? How long is that going to keep going on? If we manage to find a solution to the blood boils, which we need to do, because there's a terrible problem, do we have to keep adding those nitrates for an even longer period of time? Because the sediments won't be building up. So there's a lot of different questions. I feel like I'm running out of steam and I want to open up to questions. I don't know how much time we have here. Yes.
Yeah, she just reminded me about the creek down here. And, the problem with the mud boils. So when the settlers came here, there was salt beds down on the Onondaga Lake, and people used to harvest those things. So when the settlers came, they seen that product there, and started producing the salts for trade in the area. And then they started exploring around and found that there were also salt mines up in the Cardiff area, in Tully, in that area there. And, you know, the solvent process area, everybody knows, if anybody lived on in Lafayette area, Cardiff, you know that the creek there is like chocolate brown year round. So the solvent process started drilling up there. And now they're saying that the drilling isn't, they're not responsible for what's going on in the creek. And I think that would be a good thing to see sometime for a field trip, just to see the mud boils. It's quite a phenomenon to see what's going on over there. When there's mud that comes up sporadically, any place, comes up, and all of a sudden you'll see the trees start to lean in. It really, over, I don't know how many months, like months, then you'll see the trees kind of cave in, and then they'll sink, and then you'll end up with this big circle of mud, which we went out there a couple times now. But they've solved the problem a couple times in the past, where it popped up and they put a berm in there so it wasn't going right into the creek. And now another one oil popped up and it's just spilling right out. It's bringing up all this sediment from the bottom. And we believe because of the salt mine that was found, been going on in there. There's, I don't know how many wells drilled in the area. There's evidence of the land shifted. They had the mudslide a few years back. There's cracks in the earth in there where, you know, if you're a hunter or anybody like that, it's very dangerous to be able to fall in over there. So all this stuff is going on over there. And meanwhile, these mud wells are popping up, and there's just, I don't know how many tons of sediment going through Onondaga Creek, through the Food Nation, and into the city, and then into the lake. But that's another problem. I don't know if, but Honeywell is not taking anything that it's just a natural phenomenon that happens with these mud wells. But there isn't. Everybody knows how much drilling has been done out in that Holly area there. Bottom of the, and that's the headwaters of Onondaga Creek. So like she was saying, there's all this whole area where it all comes down into Onondaga Creek, all the headwaters, the streams. What's happening as those waters come into the lake? We know that combined sewer and overflows, and the same thing. So anytime there's a rainstorm like this, raw sewage goes into the lake because the treatment plants can't handle all that water because they're all coming together. So at certain times, you have raw sewage going into the lake from the overflow. So there's a lot of problems with that lake. We know 100 years ago, there was a lot of activity there. From records, from history. Whitefish was a delicacy that we used to trade down into the bigger cities, New York City. There was amusement parks down there on the lake, and people use the lake for all kinds of recreation. And that was 100 years ago. There's evidence of that that's been written about. So just in 100 years from now, where you can't even swim in the 95 state would swim there in the lake. So this has all happened, and quite a process to clean it up. We still continue to try to clean up. I don't know if anybody fishes in the Onondaga Creek over here. We just looked on there any time of the year, it's just a chocolate brown. I thought I should mention that it is over here in the Cardiff area. Questions?
It's over 100 years of salt mining that happened. It's a really long time. They removed massive she wants so much and valley walls are falling as a result of that.
And then she was like, she was like, so just calm down. She was like, I will, because I'm going to send
Oh, yeah, well, just when I was mentioning the 2.3 billion, I don't know how much actually, how much more it was cleaned up and addressed the whole lake, I'm not sure. But those were some of the, it would have been a full dredging of that. And that's what we thought, if you get, if you got 90% of all the contaminants in there, I think the lake itself will clean itself over the years. That's 5%. But to leave all that in there, we would like to have more dredging done. But that's not even dealing with the wastewater on it either.
So, there's an interesting thing that I'm sure everyone dragged you about today, but at the LCP chemical site, there was so much elemental mercury in the soil that they did a technique called soil washing, and they removed elemental mercury from the soil, 7 or 8 tons of it, and then they put it back on the market and it went back to use for industrial processes. There are other chemicals around the lake that exist in such pure quantities that they could be used and put back into processes so that they're not ending up in someone's backyard, right? And then there are questions that we still haven't answered, right, about what a full cleanup would look like, because the technology is not available for that. That doesn't mean that you just give up, because it's too important. The issue is too important for that, right? And we know that if you dedicate your resources to putting a Band-Aid over a huge problem, then those resources are not available for actually finding real sustainable solutions to those problems.
Earlier, I don't know what.
I know.
Polluter, would you agree on that, or would you not?
Let me make sure I understand your question. So, you're saying if we find another chemical and deal with the mercury, that was not a polluter?
No, it wasn't polluter, but help fertilize the bottom of the lake.
Fertilize the bottom of the lake, so it would pollute, but it would cause plants to grow on the bottom of the lake. I just want to take a quick little stab at that. So there are not plants at the bottom of the lake and that part of the lake because there's not enough oxygen in that part of the lake, right? So Onondaga Lake is dealing with some problems where it has, over the summer through the fall months, it has a depletion of oxygen down in the waters. And that's made worse than it was historically by the fact that we've lost the wetlands around the lake shallower, a whole bunch of factors. We've eutrophied the lake, which is to say we put lots of nutrients, like nitrates, into the lake, right? So fertilizing the bottom of the lake is not necessarily
Someone in my pond.
the end goal, right? I would say getting oxygen in the bottom of the lake is an end goal, and I don't think that's what you're going to get by putting chemicals in the lake, right? The question of actually oxygenating the bottom of the lake manually, like throwing bubbles in the bottom or finding another solution to that, that's more complicated, right? There's lots of people who haven't reached a solution on how that's done. Does that help get it? The issue. Like nitrates are a form of solution, right? A form of fertilizer. And we see that the waters all around the Great Lakes area are really, really struggling right now because of the fact that they have so many nutrients flowing into the water. So I'm raising the question, well, is this an issue? Is it a problem? I don't know the answer.
again, here we have another form of, I guess you know what you call it, pollution, sometimes it's pollution. It's not natural, it's not native to this area. And once they may clear out the water, but that's a problem, how the problem comes from.
Any more questions? So I don't know if they are, I'm raising the question, right? So, but in general, so when a lot of nutrients go into the water body, they cause a lot of plant growth, right? Plant growth does a couple things. One is it blocks out sunlight to the lower nutrients, right? And second is that when it decays, because that plant growth dies, but bacteria, the ones that are munching on that plant growth and trying to decompose it like they naturally do, use up a lot of oxygen in the water, and that's called eutrophication, right? And that depletes oxygen levels in the water, which hurts fish and other organisms in the lake. And that's a problem that we see all over the world right now, because there are so many nutrients flowing into the water, right? So I'm raising the question, okay, how long is this nitrogen addition going to have to continue? Because it's going to have to continue over a huge portion of the lake bottom, because the entire lake bottom is covered with mercury, all of it is covered with mercury. So, and most of it, as I said, only 14% of that surface area of the bottom of the lake is getting capped, stored, applying nutrients to the entire bottom of the lake. And how often are we going to do that, and how long are we going to be doing that, right? So, and will that have an impact on either the lake or the folks downstream who are dealing with nitrates from other sources besides Onondaga Lake, right? So just questions that I'm asking.
If we found a bacteria to replace nitrate that kept the mercury at the bottom, would it work, or would it kind of take the mercury scale somehow? It's not a replacement.
Natural replacement. So let's say that the bacteria that are making the mercury in the food chain, that are stealing the mercury and sending it into the food chain, make that transformation and animals that don't have oxygen in the bottom of the lake. So if you were to have